Okay, I want to get started with our panel discussion, but beforehand, again, want to thank everybody for being here. I also want to kind of plug the IT Security Awareness Fair that we're having on October 2nd and ask you folks to make sure you're registered if you haven't already, and then also ask you to get your business partners, meaning the business side folks, and if possible, chief deputies and non-IT folks to show as well, because some of the topics we're going to cover, I believe, will be very relevant, and they can really get a lot out of this if we get those folks in here. And that's kind of what we're trying to do with the security, kind of break down the walls and the barriers on security being just, you know, that ugly guy that walks in your office and says, hey, we got the sky's falling. I really want to get away from that and have the awareness and that kind of thing get to the business side. So, and the one other thing that I want to bring up is the executive lunch that we're having with Kelvin Coleman. Kelvin Coleman, which I think those of you who went last year, it's from DHS, he'll be talking about a low-end, it'll be sensitive but unclassified briefing on the threats that are out there. You're going to be getting invitations, and when you get those, we need you to RSVP, and then make sure you get your confirmation, because it is going to be a smaller session, and unless you get that, and we keep those numbers that way, we're not going to be able to do what we want to do. So please, when you get those, RSVP as soon as possible, okay? So with that, I'm going to start out and talk about our four panelists here, and then ask them, as I read off their intro, to come up to the podium and sit in the chairs. Leave this chair for me, please. I don't want to have to sit off on the edge. So, first of all, I want to introduce our panelist from Accenture, John Connick. And John is a security subject matter expert with Accenture's technology consulting, security, risk management, and IT and audits assurance, with emphasis in healthcare, financial services, and government. Prior to his assignment at Accenture, he was the Chief Information Security Officer for Estee Lauder Companies Incorporated, and also served in this capacity at the Gartner Group, Purdue Pharma, LP, and Citibank, NA Retailing Bank. John was also Director of Audit and Risk at Empire Blue Cross Blue Shield, and achieved his public audit experience with Deloitte and Touche. Mr. Connick will provide an overview on strategic security successes against today's challenges. He will also highlight innovative solutions and provide examples. So, welcome. Next, from McAfee, we've got Jim Walter. Jim Walter currently serves as manager of the McAfee Threat Intelligence Services, MTIS, for the Office of the CTO, and focuses on new threat research as well as the cataloging and maintenance of vulnerabilities and associated countermeasures. He has been with McAfee for over 13 years and works extensively with the internal sales and support teams to provide knowledge and guidance around vulnerability and malware threats. Day to day, Jim leads a global team of threat analysts and presides over the content generated by this team, the security advisories, countermeasures, detector feeds, and global threat intelligence apps, and more. Jim is a frequent speaker at industry events and conferences, and co-host of Audio Parasitics, the official podcast of McAfee. Mr. Walter will discuss the current threat landscape and where security practitioners should be focusing investments to be more proactive in protecting the enterprise. So welcome. I have to add that Congressman Lundgren, when he looked around the table when we were having lunch, goes, "There's the smartest guy in the room." Next, we've got Trend Micro, and from Trend Micro, we've got Leslie Ross, who's the State of California account manager. Leslie Ross is a security professional with over 15 years of experience in the security industry, working with agencies to safely deploy and secure their virtual environments. Today, she will provide an overview of J.D. Sherry's Trend Micro Director of Public Technology and Solutions. Not all clouds are created equal. The top 5 considerations for success. Upcoming presentation at this year's IT Security Awareness Fair on October 2nd. So, welcome, Leslie. And last but not least, from our Verizon folks, Sean McGurk. And prior to joining Verizon, Sean's served in several roles in the federal government, military, and private sector, focusing on information assurance and cybersecurity. He has over 33 years of experience in advanced systems, operation and information system security. Mr. McGurk serves as a member of the federal government senior executive service while at the Department of Homeland Security as the director of the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, or NCCIC. While at DHS, he also served as a director of the Control Systems Security Program and established the Industrial Control Systems Cyber Emergency Response Team, so ICS CERT. For several years, he worked as an arms control inspector. I'm glad I didn't say arms control, for the Department of Defense, where he conducted numerous inspections throughout the Soviet Union and subsequent Commonwealth of Independent States in accordance with the Intermediate Nuclear Force, or INF, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, START, and the Conventional Armed Forces of Europe treaties. Mr. McGurk will focus his conversation on the planning of successful cloud deployment. He will start with the importance of understanding the various models of cloud and defining the attributes of each, development of migration strategies, and the considerations that need to be addressed, including when and what to move to the cloud, cloud evaluations, eliminating single points of failure, determining suitable applications, evaluating your cloud tools requirements, how security is integrated or not into the cloud, and data protection and data sharing requirements. So, welcome. So with that, why don't we let you start off with your presentation, sir?
That's great. Thank you very much for coming. And I just want to let you know I'm in the information risk, privacy, and security strategy practice. I was formerly from New York, now in LA. And I want to share something with you, at least for the next 15 minutes, about some successes in security program development and relatively new approach to security program optimization and effectiveness, which we call security transformation. You'll hear a lot about that, in the coming year, because a lot of people, a lot of organizations have caught on to the whole notion of transformation. But I want to lay some groundwork first. The first thing was in 2012 here, a study was conducted by Scilabs, an executive study of 108 boards of the Fortune 200 companies. And the results, and I'm just going to summarize this, but for the third year in a row, revealed that 60% of company boards are still not addressing cyber risk management. That's at the board level. They have no notion, no idea what that means. And of course, you in security and risk and privacy are dealing with this every day, right? So there's obviously a gap between information technology risk and enterprise risk management within the organizations. And the boards, the report goes on to say, are not undertaking key oversight activities related to cyber risks, such as reviewing budgets, security program assessments, top-level policies, assigning roles and responsibilities for security and data privacy, and receiving regular reports on breaches and IT risks. Does that sound familiar? And this is the top, 200 Fortune 200 companies, and they came up with a number of recommendations, but it cuts across the grain of all entities, whether it's state and local government or for-profit companies. But here was the notion of recommendations, top 3 or 4. Review assessments of the organization's security program and make sure it comports with best practices and standards and includes incident response, breach notification, disaster recovery, and crisis communication plans. That was the first one. And this is by priority. Second one was conduct an annual review of the enterprise security program and effectiveness of controls and ensure that identified gaps and weaknesses are addressed. The third one was engage cross-functional teams and leadership involvement to ensure the program had broad support and better likelihood of success. And fourth, ancillary to these findings, the report also recommended that companies find and hire competently trained and experienced security and privacy professionals. So, having said all that, now hold that thought. The Department of Homeland Security declared that this year is the year of cyber warfare. And they warned that all high visibility targets, including government entities, would likely be attacked this year. There is reported a 60% increase in cyber attacks across the board, and the prevalence of advanced persistent threats has grown more sophisticated and propagated by professional hacktivists, corporate espionage experts, and foreign governments and you'll hear more about that, I'm sure, from the rest of the panel here, but hold that thought. Now, think about this. Technology, and you know this from experience in your jobs, technology is growing so fast that the average technology knowledge advancement cycle or refresh cycle has shortened from what was at one time 3 years down to just over 9 months. As you can attest by the latest technological innovations from smartphones, smart TVs, tablets, wireless networks, cloud computing, advanced storage processes, social media integration with daily living, we're bombarded with demands to control and secure data. And the proliferation of data access mechanisms with real-time activities has caused regulators, industry groups, and the public to demand better security and privacy programs, right, from those who serve the consumer. Hold that thought one more thing here. So many security officers and executives find that the organization and their superiors or boards are complaining about security. And here's some of the common complaints. The top, if I was doing a top 10, here or there, I won't go through them all, but see if you can identify with any of these. Quote, I don't understand the value I'm getting from information security. That was number one. Number two, we are spending a lot on information security, but are we spending on the right things? Number three, how can I protect us from being the next Sony or UBS? Number four, our information security budget has been slashed this year. Complete that line, right? Now what are we going to do? Five, we're considering acquiring or divesting a new business. Okay, so what is security going to do about that? Our intellectual property repository may have been breached. What are we? Number seven, we may have lost some files or laptops, or they may have been stolen. May have been, right?
Not sure.
Not sure. Number eight, we are thinking about outsourcing or offshoring our IS operations. What's the implication for security? Number nine, we suffered an internal breach leading to embezzled funds. And 10, we are concerned about whether our vendors are appropriately protecting our information. A lot of regulations around that. So what's the organization doing about it, right? And so what is the information security person or privacy person or risk professional in that organization going to do? How do they deal with this? One company or organization just the other day came to us and said, and this was this CISO, large organization, and said, we've merged with another company, we're the survivor, we've pulled in their security people, but we have so many things going on, we have so many acquisitions going on every year, and they want to integrate all those organizations into ours, and we're at risk, and we can't even get a seat at the table in the business strategy meetings to figure out how to put the right security on. What do we do, right? So the question is, do you find yourself continually putting out fires, as that person does, or are you moving on a path to more stability or sustainability? And that's the notion of transformation. That you really have four quadrants. It's like you're putting out fires, which we call triage, or you're in a stability mode. You got past that a little bit. Now you're trying to put some organization in order to it. And then past that is like, hey, let's really refine and define the way that we work out our security so we get the best bang for bucks, and that includes the metricizing and some other processes, GRC type processes, governance, risk and compliance, and then to sustainability, and that is really optimizing and aligned to the business. And that's really where security finds its most value. When you can convince the operational units that security can be leveraged to provide better service, more stability in your service, you have a greater chance of success in your security program. So, I said, well, if you can identify with any of those comments that I read to you, you're probably right for security transformation. The notion is boards usually come to the CISO and say, we have a problem with X. You need to do something about that. Tell us what you need, money-wise, and we'll try to allocate that. But they don't address all the other symptoms that go along with that. Well, we heard the congressman talking about greater security awareness. In the banking world, they came out with something this past June, which was mandated to be implemented by the end of last year, which of course the banks have no way of doing that, but that requires security awareness and risk management training for their customers. Now think about it. Most of us can't even do that for our organization. How are we supposed to do that for our customers? Right? But that's the mandate. The thought is, if you can train these people what to look out for in their company when they are transacting business over that online banking to that bank, it'll reduce the risk of fraud in funds transfer and thereby reduce the risk to the monetary system. Well, that sounds great, but how do you do that, right? And so when we talk about transformation, we're really looking at three things. And it's important, any good security program, if you want to move forward to optimize processes, integrate to the business, is you have to have a foundation. And we see so much in the way of GRC implementations that fail. And why do they fail? They don't lay the foundation. In fact, we have one entity that started to implement GRC, and the vendor told them, whatever you do, don't customize, because we update with versions that if you customize, you're not going to be able to go with the updates, because you have to figure out what you change, what we change. 6 versions later, they're still stuck on the first version, and they're saying that they need help because they're not getting the bang for the buck. They want to go to the latest version, but it's like, jumping over a chasm, right? Because there's no way, because the people who originally put it in left the company. So now you're stuck with a product, you spend millions of dollars and it doesn't work for you, right? So you have to build a foundation. You have to have some kind of a baseline. What is it you're complying with or building to? So the ISO 27002 or COVID, or if you're doing the NIST 800-37 risk assessment and using that framework, then you're using the NIST 800-53A database controls. Okay. The problem is, again, if you don't really know what you're doing, well, again, this one company came to us and said, we tried to establish this framework and put this GRC program in place, and we've identified 60,000 control items. 60,000. And they said, how are we going to do this? We have 3 people. Okay. So it'd take you 20 years, right? Okay. So anyways, not happening. So obviously they didn't base it on what was appropriate to them. And so again, some of the issues, to start with the foundation, and then go to improving efficiency. So once you have that established security model, and you know what the domains of the security model are, so you can figure out and do some kind of assessment, which is what is being mandated anyways, an annual assessment to map out your program to how you relate to that baseline and how are you doing. And really, most organizations that we talk to can't answer 3 questions. And the first one, and this is appropriate for any kind of metrics program. So if you think metrics, what are you trying to do? So the first thing is, are we doing the right things? That's the first thing. And how do you know, right? The second thing is, are we doing them well? So you might be doing the right things, but you're not doing them well. You're not optimized. You're not efficient, right? And the third thing is, what would we be doing different or better? And your reporting system, your whole security program, should give you that kind of capability. You should know how well you're doing. You should be able to say, look, here's the benchmark. Here's what I was mandated to do, and I can show them how well we're doing or not. And if you can't do that, that's a fundamental problem in the framework. And so it doesn't matter what you try to implement. If you try to implement vendor tools and you can't get that kind of information, and it doesn't cut across the grain for your program, you're not optimized, and you really have some room for improvement. And so now I'll give you some examples of companies that have gone that way, where they've implemented a security program and really optimized. And here was a company that was being hit annually by significant millions of dollars of fines for regulatory compliance with SOX and PCI. So I use this one as a good one because what they finally, the board got involved, and then because the regulators went back to the board, and so the credit card companies said, you know, we're pulling credit cards out of this company, right? We can't use our credit cards anymore. And the fact of the matter is they're in 140 countries, and you know they got 30-something brands, and they have to have credit card receipts, et cetera. By the same token, it's a public company. They have to comply with SOX. They have to comply with PCI. They weren't doing either, and they were okay with paying the fines. They're making billions of dollars. Hey, what's the 100 million or 50 million? Okay. Anyways, so they said, okay, this is ridiculous because now, you know, someone's going to be in trouble, and they bit the bullet. And they said, okay, now let's find a program that we can integrate all of our security components so that we can comply with PCI. But it wasn't just that, hey, let's meet PCI compliance. Let's look at the whole strategy of security and how this can be integrated with the business. So when the brain is going to go and build a retail site in one of Macy's, for instance, they want to make that secure. They want to take credit cards, but they also want that information to come back to the company in a secure fashion. We partnered with them to build in security, secure firewalls, secure protocols, et cetera, so that now, and they paid for it. So the security didn't have to pay for it. We partnered with them, and they were able to, you know, integrate that. And that reduced the overall cost because the other option they had was significantly higher. So they integrated that. We then worked with them to build out a full security incident and event management system. So every device, every router, every switch, every server, firewall, any device that touched security or secure data was routing through a configuration management tool which fed into the SIEM tool, which then got reported on. It was standardized. It fed into the problem help desk tracker and the security breach notification system, so that every time a change was made and it wasn't correlated to authorized change control, it alerted the system. Someone got immediately notified and action was taken. But those are the kinds of things that have to happen in an integrated system that is in the fashion of transformation. I'll give you another example. I know I'm running out of time here. But here was a company that, after 9/11, that was close to the action where the towers fell. And they had one central site for their process. It was a very large company, multi-billion-dollar company, and they were proud to be in New York City. That's why they had this one big data center. And they realized after 9/11 they were at risk, and they said, okay, what do we do? And they're paying hundreds of millions of dollars in backup to a backup company and whatnot. And so, you know, we went in and identified their whole operation, and we worked with them to define a better solution. That was break up that data center into 4 different data centers around the area, back up each other to one another, so now they have their own backup mechanisms, and they could eliminate the outside backup entity and save them millions of dollars a year, but it also made them efficient, and it caused them to go back through their whole backup process, their storage management, the whole 9 yards, and they optimized that and saved millions of dollars in that. These are the things that happen in a transformation. And the point of a transformation is this. You don't go back. You know, it's like, you know, the caterpillar doesn't go back to become the butterfly doesn't go back to become a caterpillar. And it's not like a jump over a large divide. It's not a 2-jump effort. It's, you know, once you go, you're not going back. And the point is, you know, you know where you've been, and you don't want to go back there. And you want to be able to come back to your management, come back to the board, whatever, and show them, listen, there's value to security, and here's how we are going to do it, and here's how we can show success. And once you can start showing success, they will see that and say, hey, this is money well spent. So let's you know, invest more money in that. And you partner with the businesses from a strategic standpoint and say, look, hey, we can optimize your user provision. If we can do that, we can save the entity hundreds or thousands or millions of dollars and solve the compliance problem. Because now we get automated compliance reports. Same with security awareness. You have that, you know, web-based training and so on and so forth. and it's tied into your HR system or customer or CRM system. So you know now who's had the training, who's not compliant, and you can go and deal with that, but you no longer have to produce reports. And I'll give you one last quick one. One of the state entities on the East Coast having to provide reporting to the Department of Homeland Security on their security measures and whatnot, was taking 3 weeks to produce a report. And they had a GRC system, but it wasn't being utilized properly. So we went in there and worked with them, and after a period of time, we were able to produce that report in 3 days, automated. And so that solved the problem. So now, instead of having 6 people working on this for a whole month, they're freed up. They no longer have to do it. It's taken from the systems. That's transformation.
Thanks. Jim?
Sure. So I'm Jim Walter with McAfee, and so I'll use my 15 minutes to kind of tell you everything you ever need to know about malware threats, the whole history of it. But actually, there's some running themes that have been discussed today that I do want to hit on that speak volumes with regards to current trends that we've been seeing, for the last couple of years, but then also some of the things that are kind of emerging and evolving as we look forward. So, just to kind of start off, when we're just talking about like pure malware, your traditional parasitic viruses, and your statics, like your worms and your Trojans, the self-contained type of malware, those have been rising exponentially since the dawn of computer viruses and continue to do so. Now, what's interesting is kind of where the rises occur and when they've occurred and what all that means. But mentioned during my introduction, I've been with McAfee for actually just last week, I think it was 14 years. So I remember when our DATs had under 100, our DATs are what our AV product uses to detect stuff, the signatures, if you will. I remember when they had under 100,000 unique signatures in the DATs. Now, we see on any given month, 7, 10, 15 million new unique pieces of malware. So it's just gone beyond where it was in the 90s and early 2000s. Where it really started to take off is around the 2003, 2004 timeframe when bots and botnets, some people call them zombies, et cetera, really kind of started to come into their own and be used as a mechanism for basically malware management and control. And that's also when we start to see the shift from kind of just destructiveness and notoriety to financial-based malware. But in 2004, you have a few real prevalent, prolific bots that really just exploded the whole scene and ignited all the copycats, and then this evolution that has followed. There was kind of a pseudo competition between what we called Bagel, NetSky, and MyDoom, 3 different bots that were just every day, there were campaign after campaign after campaign. And in that year alone, 2004, just the number of malware that we were starting to see on a daily, hourly basis exploded, and it's continued to do so since. And a lot of it has to do with that initial rise of bots and botnets and that kind of thing. But also out of that evolved what we kind of call today is the malware as a service, or the business side of malware. And that's really what it is today. It's completely financial, and it's extremely successful. And there's a lot of money in it and a lot of motive for adversaries to get into that business. Basically, and there were a few things back then that I think there was Golden Hacker Defender, which is a rootkit that had kind of a subscription model where the author would every month provide you an update if you paid to ensure that it would stay undetected by AV at the time. So that was kind of one of the first examples of that sort of feature set that we saw, or service that we saw. But that's completely evolved, and now it's extremely common and extremely easy. You don't even know how to code to basically generate your own botnet, become a bot herder or bot master, and start raking in all this money from this creation that you could customize yourself through very easy to use GUI-driven kits, or you can pay someone to do even deeper levels of customization, and you can have this complete targeted attack customized to your needs and deliver to you, or if you want to stay removed from it, you can pay someone else to do the seeding and campaigning for you. But it's all there for you. You can buy it, and there's open forums where you can just go and either find people that offer this service, or if you offer the service, you can go and advertise yourself, kind of like a Craigslist sort of situation. But there's hundreds, thousands of these forums, all different languages, all different locations, where this kind of stuff is discussed and bought and sold and provided. And that ecosystem and economy has also just very much exploded. And what we'll see is, we'll have, many thousand different runs of a specific variant of a certain bot that is generated from all these kits, Black Hole Kit or a Zeus or Eleanor, Incognito, what have you. Then you'll see people take those same things. If they don't have access to the builder kits or don't want to pay the $2,000 a month or whatever it is to access that kit, they'll just use the same piece of malware and repack it or do other sorts of simple obfuscation to make it unique and undetected, and then allow it to do whatever they need to do. So malware creation and distribution has become very, very simple and very accessible, and that has contributed greatly to the volume of stuff we see. So, malware is expanding, growing, evolving. It's not going away. We will never get rid of it. So it's just kind of this thing that is out there. But there's interesting little pockets that in traditional controls are basically successful against protecting you against these basic types of Trojans and worms and viruses. Where it gets real interesting is, we've all heard the term 0 day, and we know what that is. But even more worrisome than those, I think, are what we call kind of single use. And those are these, again, very targeted pieces of malware, but they're not parts of these kits. They're commissioned by certain entities from certain to certain entities to create just for one specific attack or one specific campaign. And we in the industry may never actually even see a sample of that thing, or even know that it exists, or it might exist in a dormant state on the system for 3, 4, 5 years before someone says, "Ooh, hey, what's that?" and then sends it to an AV company or their trusted security partner, and then alarms start to go off, and something interesting is there, and then dots start to connect, etc. So these single-use binaries or pieces of malware are, in a lot of ways, a lot more interesting. And oftentimes there's overlap there with the whole 0 day thing. That may be a very targeted, specific piece of code that only exists in that one situation on that one machine in that one location. And it also may have new undisclosed, the ability to exploit new and undisclosed flaws in some popular application that they happen to know that is running in that environment, be it reader, flash, whatever. So, that's one of the interesting challenges that is, as we analyze the growth of malware and what's sparking this and what's interesting in it and what is just kind of the day-to-day stuff that is basically being churned out by all these kits. And so that's when we have to kind of, how do we get ahead of this, kind of curve. Like, we start to look at, sort of cloud-based detection technologies and other sorts of behavioral type things. What we call traditional antivirus has not been, traditional for many years. It's the whole industry moved away from just straight hash or signature fingerprint type scanning a long time ago. When people sometimes say AV is dead, signature scanning doesn't work. Well, I agree, but no one's been doing that. That's part of it, but everyone's doing heuristic stuff. Everyone's doing behavioral stuff. Everyone's doing cloud-based stuff. It has been for quite some time. So those are some of the things that we do to kind of stay ahead of that curve. So, one detection of a new unique binary that triggers certain levels of paranoia in our system. Even though we don't see that in-house and haven't analyzed it, on our side, research-wise, having seen that hash in one environment, someone else then that is also part of a customer base or a cloud-based detection type scenario might also benefit from that detection. If it ends up in their environment as well, then that triggers that as well. So there's most AV vendors have a similar kind of technology there. So that's just one way that we kind of stay ahead of the curve, other than just being ongoing, just tuned in and doing improving generics, improving heuristics, improving engine-based unpacking, so that we can get through all the different weird levels of obfuscation to detect the code that's really there, which is oftentimes the same as something that we've already seen before. So there's all kinds of stuff going on, but the bottom line there is, malware is now, always has been, and will continue to grow at an overwhelming rate, certainly more than humans can keep up with it, using methods that we used back in the early 2000s and 90s. And another thing is, it's worth highlighting is some of these kits that are used to generate the bots and generate either Trojans or malicious documents for phishing or spear phishing campaigns. The most popular ones, if you're talking about some of the latest versions of like Black Hole, which is in the news a lot, so you're probably familiar. But the Phoenix and Eleanor and Best Pack and Ice Pack and a bunch of others, they tend to all kind of concentrate on some of the most common vulnerabilities when it comes to exploitation. And they're very successful in doing that. But if you look at those 5 applications with those vulnerabilities, typically it's certain versions of Windows, Adobe Flash Player, Adobe Reader, Adobe Acrobat, QuickTime, and then some JavaScript flaws that span multiple platforms. If you just cover those bases, then you'll be in a pretty decent position protection-wise. Cover those bases from a patch and management perspective, then you'll be in a much better situation prevention-wise when it comes to some of these auto-churning malware kits. But even that oftentimes gets overlooked. A lot of organizations, at least that I've dealt with, are very well-tuned when it comes to like Microsoft patch management. And every second Tuesday I'm going to go and evaluate these patches and roll them out if I need them and determine what my risk level is, etc. But you have to do the same with some of those other applications and other platforms, which isn't always the case. You need to do the same anytime there's a Flash Player update or a Adobe Reader update or an update to Safari would be another good example. And just Adobe alone in the last week has been a great example because we've seen one of the recent Flash vulnerabilities, I think it's CD 2012-1535, already incorporated into a lot of these kits, and we're already seeing just mass campaigns of malicious SWF files on websites, in different social media contexts that are there to allow that flaw to be exploited and then either directly serve malware or redirect users to some other malicious location, etc. But there's a patch out there, so you've got to keep on top of that stuff. But the bad guys are really quick at incorporating this stuff, and once they know about it, it's probably going to be typically we see 24, 48, 72 hours before it's we really start to see a lot of pickup on some of those things. So short on time, one other piece a couple other pieces I'll touch on here. The critical infrastructure piece is huge, but it's definitely not a new area that we should be concentrating on. That's been a vulnerable area for quite some time, and it's still in that vulnerable state that it's been in for quite some time. I spoke at a conference in Houston in October of 2008, all about this. It was all about SCADA, critical infrastructure. What are the risks? What's going on there? And we would just at that time you'd always see forum postings or bug track threads about some weird issue with SCADA or some undisclosed vulnerability and what does it all mean. And these systems have been known to the bad guys for quite some time, and finding the vulnerable systems is not difficult either. You can go to Shodan, you can go to a site like ERIP, which is I think has been dormant for a couple of years, but a lot of the systems that you find on there, if you search for power grid or water, you'll find externally accessible IP addresses of systems that are that you can just click on, and you'll get a web interface to log in. Oftentimes it'll be the default login for whatever it was, because some guy that manages that decided that he wanted to put it up there so he could go home at a decent time at night and manage a system from there, but there was no other thought put into it. Also, oftentimes these systems are running legacy OS. We still see a lot of like NT4, Windows 2000, and OSPs, that kind of stuff, running some of these interfaces and some of these systems. So there's a lot to think about there, but it's definitely a hot topic now. It has been for some time. And I'll just wrap it up. Just, some of the new emerging stuff that's kind of piquing our interest and picking up some steam. Obviously, the medical stuff, which a couple people have mentioned. There's a lot of research, and there have been a lot of proven demonstrations of being able to hack things like insulin pumps, defibrillators, wireless pacemakers, which have huge security implications. From a just general nuisance standpoint all the way to possibilities surrounding things like assassination and that kind of stuff. So that's a big deal. As video game consoles, there's a lot of interest around those. Everyone's got these connected Xboxes, Wii's, etc. And so there's already a lot of malicious research going on, kind of putting out their feelers to see what they can access, what they can't, what they can root, what they can't, and also on the good guy side, we're looking at those as well. And you got weird stuff like car hacking and some other interesting areas that we're taking a look at. But I'll wrap it up with that. But those are some of the things that we're kind of starting to focus on, aside from all the other bits and pieces you mentioned.
Thanks, Jim. Leslie.
Thanks. I wanted to say thank you for having us today, and at the same time, J.D. Sherry, our Director of Public Technology, who I'm standing in for today, is in Australia. So of all places, he had to go speak at a conference there. But I have to say, talking about the medical stuff today has scared the crud out of me. I have to have knee surgery next Thursday. And if you think I haven't thought about every single conversation we've had about hacking of medical devices and making sure that they're going to, operate on the right knee and all those kinds of good things. So, it's something that we don't always think about as terms go, but it's, I think, always, something that we need to have in the back of our mind, that we need to be cognizant of. Not all systems are, as safe as we'd like them to be. So today I'm talking about cloud computing, and I know it's top of mind for everybody in the state agencies. We will be presenting at ITSAF. JD will be going through the top 5 focus areas that we hear from our customers that they're asking for help with. And I would say right now we're acting as consultant basis rather than actually deploying cloud computing technology from a overall perspective. But what we're looking at doing is helping people to plan. And that's the one thing I've heard today more than ever from just with Congressman Lundgren and our panel people here is that, we need to start thinking about this. We know that we're going to be utilizing the cloud as time goes by. But what are some of the things that we should be instilling in our security folks and in the people that we're going to be dealing with, our vendors, our partners and so forth, around cloud computing and security? So the top 5 things that we're going to be talking about at ITSAF is, the number one is the types of cloud. So do I want to utilize private, public, a hybrid approach, right? And in each of those types of clouds, there are control mechanisms. Who has control, right? What type of security is needed? And when do I start planning for that security? And I saw this a couple of years ago when I was working with VMware, when virtualization was, kind of making its rampant emergence into the market. And we started utilizing, regular security technologies to secure these virtual environments, and soon found out that there were some inherent issues with that. I've seen the same things kind of happen with people looking at cloud computing. It's, okay, I don't know what I don't know yet. We don't know, we understand that there can be breaches in the cloud. We understand that there's a different technology or different ways of technology that we should be providing, but we don't know everything yet because it's such a new phenomenon to us as state agencies to use. So when we stop and look and work with our customers, and partners is what we want to do is to keep security front of mind. And I think this would be very important to everybody from an agency and ISO level, is that we need to keep security up in the very beginning stages of planning to allow us to then make the best decisions that we can in deploying and deciding which type of information. Because it'll never be completely safe. I mean, there's going to be breaches. Amazon, Eucalyptus, whoever you decide to use, there's always going to be, a security breach happening. So the only thing that you can really do is provide layers of protection, which we have preached as the security vendors forever, and to make sure that, you're putting those layers in at the appropriate time. The other thing that I think will become extremely important as we move into the cloud is we've got our physical infrastructure, which will always have some left, I believe. That we've got our virtual infrastructure, and then now our cloud infrastructure. How do I integrate as an agency? How do I integrate all of those into a single console? And all of us security vendors that have been working for years and years to help drive that integrated console to help, because you guys aren't being able to hire more employees. You're actually doing more with less, and many of the IT departments are very small. So how do we take that integrated approach across physical, virtual, and cloud? So that'll be some of the things that JD will be sharing, talking about best practices around that. He was an ex-customer of Trend, so he has a real-world experience of deploying both virtualized security and then moving into the cloud. The second thing is multi-tenancy and mixed trust levels, right? So you've got sensitive, non-sensitive, R&D type of information. What does that look like in the cloud infrastructure? How do you make that data? And I get, sometimes as an account executive, I get to thinking about servers and physical things. But when you really look at it, it's the data that you need to make self-defending. And how do you do that? What does it take to get there? How do you take security policies around those assets and make sure that it follows that asset from a physical, virtual, or cloud infrastructure? It shouldn't matter, right? I mean, we should be able to rely on our security and our policies to take us through all of the various, and then up into the cloud as we move into there. The third is data access and governance. And from a policy perspective, this is, I think, huge. PCI, HIPAA. I don't know how many people in this room would feel comfortable in just kind of moving your personal information up into the cloud yet. I mean, I don't know. I think people are still very afraid of the fact that public cloud providers are being breached. So how does that information, how do I know that that information isn't getting breached itself? So understanding where encryption and policy key-based management and having the things in place that give you the best opportunity to be successful. And again, I go back to that planning stage of migrating. What type of migrating plan are you going to have? And I'm sure that Bryce is going to talk a little bit about this from a migration perspective, but it's, make that planning imperative along with those security policies. That gives you the best opportunity to have success. Test, right? And make sure that you're understanding how that security is moving along with that. The fourth is the data destruction. And I think this is a really key part of what people are looking at. Once I get my data up there, one of the best cost benefits is that I can move it around, right? I mean, if I'm with Amazon today, and I decide that, wow, I can get a better contract with Eucalyptus tomorrow, how do I move that data? How do I do it securely? How do I do it and that the remnants in those data stores are unreadable to anybody else coming in there? And that is very key in your planning stages around, again, security based on cloud environments. That goes across your virtual environment and understanding how that virtual security interacts with that public cloud security. So how do you get that secure communication between that data in your virtual environment and your cloud environment? So that will be very key as you start to look at that and making sure that that communication between those levels of clouds is there and is defending for you. I think another thing is that from a security perspective is, I think the terrifying thing for an ISO or a security officer is that what if something happens? How can I go back and how can I have confidence that I could show that I had integrity and validation checks against my security policies that were taking place? So again, it comes back to maybe not having to go by PCI compliance or HIPAA compliance, but having a compliancy standard across the state that says you must, be able to provide some type of documentation that shows that you were validating that communication between who, what, where can access what kind of data in the cloud, and being able to alert and put reporting across to that. So I think, that will be very key for you as you start to look at what kinds of information and what kind of reporting and, what our agencies are able to provide. And I think boosting confidence in that. So as we start to migrate more and more of this information to the cloud and we get comfortable with the idea of the cloud, and someone the other day asked, where did the term cloud come from? And I'm like, I don't really know. But then I remember going back years ago, when we used to draw on the whiteboard, we used to draw the cloud, and that was the internet. And so I don't know if really that's where the term, I don't know that, but I thought, well, maybe that is where it came from, because we started to use cloud as such an integral part of what we're doing. And I'll be honest with you, most of the people I have talked to, it's like, well, what does it mean to you, right? I mean, what type of cloud are you talking about? A public infrastructure cloud can be very different from a private cloud, can be very different, from a virtualized platform. I mean, there's all kinds of things that go along with that. So I think terminology will start to standardize. As state agencies and as government, I think that we need to standardize on what we're talking about, so that when we're talking about security and we're talking about cloud infrastructures, that everybody is talking the same thing. Because I think sometimes that's where people can get a little bit off base of what do you mean by cloud, or what do you mean by virtual security, or what do you mean by cloud security? So I think that we'll find that as to become more of a standard as we go along. And then the fifth thing that we're going to be doing at ITSAF is providing a case study. We have a customer who's been with us for a very long time, has come through kind of the ranks of security, their endpoint security, their gateway security, their messaging security, and they then decided as a city that they wanted to implement PCI, being able to take credit cards from their constituents in their city. How do I take care of that? How do I put in the compensating controls that I need for PCI? And so they've gone through many of the stages with us through virtualization and now moving and looking into the cloud. So we'll actually have them as a panel and encouraging your folks who come to the technical breakout is to ask the questions, to ask those hard questions of someone who's had to go through a migration, who's had to go through looking at utilizing the cloud and virtual infrastructures and what that felt like and maybe some of the pitfalls that they had and how they were able to successfully do that. And I would say that I think it was kind of funny because I walked up here with my iPad, but my notes are really actually typed. And I was part of physical security. I was afraid, what if I lost my iPad? What would I do without having my notes? So that was kind of just an afterthought, but it's physical security, cloud security, virtual security. It's all the things that we're thinking about today and how they integrate into our lives. So. Thank you.
Great. I appreciate everyone's attention today and the opportunity to have this dialogue. Being alphabetically last in the list basically doesn't leave me much more to say. Everyone has really covered a lot of the topics quite well. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about cloud enabling technologies, because I think an interesting comment was made earlier, and it's the operational definition of what we call cloud. I'm sure if we took a poll in the room, everyone would have a separate definition for the enabling technologies used for distributed storage, management, and computational power. NIST spent a long time trying to determine or define what cloud structures are at the federal level. And in my role at DHS, I had the unique opportunity to work in implementing cloud technologies in the Department of Homeland Security across several levels, including classified levels, and actually worked on the NIST board writing those standards. I would point as a reference to 800-293, Volume 1 and Volume 2, which are good references to talk about how to plan for cloud implementation and then how to actually identify needs and requirements. Instead of trying to define it, which was really the challenge that we were coming up with, we talked about what are the capabilities or what are the characteristics of what we're trying to achieve. So if I look at from an operational standpoint and from a knowledge management standpoint, what are my intentions? What are my requirements? And the first thing that comes up is almost the opposite of the classic information assurance statement where it's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. When we talk about distributed capability, we're talking about availability being one of the key elements that we focus on. I need to ensure that my data is available no matter where it resides, regardless of platform, regardless of vendor. So that really became a key element in our focus in defining what cloud would become. So that was that on-demand service requirement. Ubiquitous access was the second element that we talked about. You need to be able to access the data no matter where you are, regardless of platform, regardless of environment. In order to be able to do that, we took a vendor-agnostic approach. So it was more about enabling technologies than it was about specific solutions. And then one of the key elements that was really introduced by our private sector partners at the time was it's got to be metered. So you can't just throw this bill at me every month if I'm not using the full capability. So if it doesn't have a metered characteristic to it, then it's really of no value to me. I need to be able to understand what I'm paying for and what I'm supporting. Elasticity or resilience is another big element that we want to focus on. How can I make sure that the loss of one data center doesn't lead to the loss of all of my data for a prolonged period of time? And we see that a lot in continuity of operations procedures and our backup facilities to ensure that we have that capability. And finally, can I pool resources? I mean, am I paying for a dedicated capability? So whether it's software as a service, platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service, can I sit there and actually pool those resources so it's more of an on-demand requirement? And can I share that in given circumstances? Taking it from a state level standpoint, if I am operating an emergency operations center that's statewide, and I want to be able to manage that data and those remote locations in a distributed environment, do I have to pay for that 24/7, 365, or is that something that I can timeshare based on requirements? These are the things that you start thinking about when you're talking about introducing these enabling technologies. And that's really the phrase that we use a lot is enabling technologies, because it's not focused on one particular capability. We can talk about, either Amazon's capability or Terramark's capability, how we can use tools like CloudSwitch to make sure you're getting and migrating your data in a secure fashion. All of those are technologies that enable a desired end state. But it's up to the organization to determine what that desired end state is. And there are some controls in place to help us do that. Not only do we look at FISMA compliance from a federal standpoint, 800-53 audits and requirements, but we also look at other industrial control type standards to ensure that we're focusing on what the requirements are for migrating and managing that data. And then who owns and controls it? And this was really a big issue for a lot of us. So I can relinquish control of the distribution and management of the information, but I don't relinquish responsibility and I don't relinquish the authorities. So that is still incumbent upon me to identify in those service level agreements up front so that I understand what my requirements are, what my regulatory compliance issues are, and then the responsibility and the authorities associated with that data. And how do I manage that in a distributed environment? Those are some of the challenges that we also look at. From a security standpoint, the group that I work with in Verizon is actually the organization that produces the Data Breach Investigation Report, the DBIR. That's published annually. This year we put it out in 7 different languages, including English, because we had a very large international group of players this year. And we also created an iBook for those that are technologically inclined, so you can go through it and tab it. But it was interesting because what we started to look at were 3 new elements in the DBIR this year. One of them was the bring your own device phase, or BYOD. And how does that impact breaches? How does that affect security? We also looked at enabling technologies in two ways, or looking at breaches that actually impacted cloud environments. It was managed and hosted. And we actually separated it. Whether you actually hosted the service yourself or had it hosted by a third party, and if you managed it yourself or had it managed by a third party. For those breaches that occurred in an organization that hosted their own devices or their own cloud environment, 50% of the breaches were associated with that hosting of the material. It's the first year we've actually started looking at this capability or parsing the data this way, so it's very difficult to draw parallels. But essentially, if you take your current policies, practices, and procedures and just apply them to a new environment, are you really changing anything? Or are you looking at developing this capability and these technologies and actually physically and functionally changing your processes? And the same thing for managing. If you manage your own capability, even though it's hosted somewhere else, the numbers are basically the same. You see the same level of breach capability. Now, what was interesting, and again, it was not a relatively large sample set, but only 1% of all breaches were associated with bring your own devices. Part of that is because it's not really caught on too much, and it's not a large part of what we do. But as we continue to do that, are there policies in place and the governance models in place to ensure that those devices that we're allowing to access our network are managed in an appropriate and secure fashion? A lot of times we talk about security as a price point. Security is an enabler. Security is a part of the resiliency structure that you build. It is a capability that is inherent in any distributed organization or distributed environment. And we need to be able to approach security from that standpoint so that we understand that we're developing a capability that enables the operational resiliency and the continuity of operations that's necessary to protect the data in motion, protect the data at rest, and also to provide us with an operational capability that transcends our current environment. And oh, by the way, we divide all that by cost. Because in the private sector, when we look at risk, and we actually define risk as an equation, it's threats, vulnerabilities, and consequences. That's how we define risk. And we divide that by cost. So if I'm looking at only threat activity, then I'm missing part of that equation. And by focusing on threat, it's literally like playing whack-a-mole, because you're just looking at that next threat actor as it appears. If you're focusing on the vulnerabilities that are being exploited, then regardless of the capability of the threat actor, because contrary to what you read a lot of time, advanced persistent threat is usually not advanced, it is sometimes persistent. But it does exploit commonly known vulnerabilities. It was interesting because during our discussion with the congressman, we talked about critical infrastructure and how we're protecting critical infrastructure and how these enabling technologies exist. I don't see SCADA in a virtual environment anytime soon, simply because these are real-time operating systems that don't lend themselves well to virtualization. But I do see the management of data and the connection or the connectivity between the enterprise environment and the operations environment, or the OT, continuing to evolve. When we talk about zero-day vulnerabilities in the enterprise world, in the IT world, that's something that we're concerned with. In the SCADA world, we're talking about zero-decade vulnerabilities, because these are things that have been out there for 10, 20, 30 years, we're all well aware of. And it's a function of the interconnected nature of the environments and also of the requirements of the drivers. Those systems were designed to be interoperable. They were designed to communicate openly. They were not designed to be secure. So subsequently, we have to look at a defense in depth strategy. We actually publish a paper called Defense in Depth. It's our most cited and least read document, because everyone talks about it, but we all rely on perimeter defense, and we say IDS, IPS, UTM, that's the panacea, that's going to save our network, that's going to enable my cloud environment to be secure. We don't recognize that unfortunately perimeter defense is a part of the solution, but it's not an end state. It is truly a Maginot Line, and for those of you old enough in the room that know what the Maginot Line is, I won't need to go into explanations. But subsequently, we've actually seen data breaches during our forensic analysis where information was being exfiltrated by field devices, headwater management systems associated with a utility many hundreds of miles away from the enterprise network, but because of the trusted environment associated with it, it became a safe haven. So even when the IT security folks would clean up the enterprise environment in the evening when they would do their security scans and runs, because the malcode had been hosted in a trusted enclave, it was reinfecting each day. And oh, by the way, the firewall rules were configured in such a way that the information was actually being exfiltrated through port 2222, which was used for a particular brand of industrial control communications. It's a Modbus over IP protocol port that's used. And that wasn't part of the normal firewall rules associated with this organization. And this was a public utility. We also saw last year, Shodan was mentioned. If you haven't actually gone to Shodan and put in your IP range or put in the name of your organization, it's a very interesting exercise in security. Because what you'll find is not only your open IP ranges, but you'll find the platforms, the boxes with the operating system that's running, the version that it's up to date on, and any ports or protocols that are open and functioning and communicating. Last year, there were 76 water companies in the United States, including several here in the state of California, that were using a human-machine interface that was publicly available, that was communicating openly via a web interface. And by using Shodan, these 76 water entities were identified by a researcher, and that information was made available. Because that particular username and password that was in the documents was hard-coded in the firmware, the operators had no idea that it was even present. So when they changed the default admin username and password, it had no impact on the system because the manufacturer had embedded this security feature for remote service into the software itself. So these are the types of challenges that we have going forward. And this is why when we look at technologies, not to focus on the technology as the end state, but what is the goal of the organization? What are your requirements and how can we best help you identify what those requirements are and then bring about the technologies that achieve the goal. By the way, just as an aside, it's not something that I like to talk about often, but the term is wetware hacking. So that's the embedded medical devices. That's what the underground community calls it today. Yeah, firmware, hardware, and wetware, because they consider us to be wetware, and that's what they're focusing on. So just as a little side note, you can jot that down and use that for future use. Subject to your questions, and I hope there are several of them, that really concludes my remarks.
Thanks, Sean. So basically, Shodan is like the Facebook for devices, network devices, and IP ranges.
Yeah, Shodan's a very interesting tool. It was developed by the research community to provide capability, so it's not a text-based search engine. It's more or less used for ports and protocols and operating systems and IP ranges. It's a very interesting capability. And if I may, just one comment on Facebook and LinkedIn and all those other social networks, from a security risk standpoint, that has taken dumpster diving to the digital age. I mean, literally, I can identify, based on your LinkedIn profile, I can go and say, oh, I went to the University of Saskatchewan as well. We should connect. Oh, and this is the type of email address that you use at work, and this is the schema that you use. So now I can start targeting those specific spear phishing campaigns to access your information. So be cautious when you're enabling those type of social media technologies as part of your normal communications plan. And you're in a tough spot because as a public entity, a public agency, you have to be available and you have to respond to those technology requests and those social media requests. So that's an area that you do need to focus on, but you should be aware and cognizant of the challenges associated with it as well.
Well, I want to thank John, Jim, Leslie, and Sean, and we are going to open up the questions, but I want to thank all of you for your time and for the presentations. As they talk about, these are kind of previews for the IT Security Awareness Fair, so keep that in mind, folks. So with that, I will open it up to questions, and while Sherilyn gets ready with the first one, I'll ask the first one. You talked to John a little bit about, or a lot about ISOs and all the things they're facing. So what do you think the top three issues that ISOs are facing, and do you think that the approach that you mentioned will help them, and if so, how?
Sure. I think the top three from our conversations with a lot of the CISOs out there are compliance is number one. I think most companies are spending a lot of money or putting in the budget. Some companies are doing nothing but compliance because they have a lot to catch up on. And coupled with that is new technologies, enabling technologies, BYOD, very big. They see that they can't stop it, and so they need to find a way to secure it and make it acceptable and monitor and control it. That opens up the security person to the need for much more security training in the devices or the technologies to control or secure those technologies. And the third is really helping to develop the security program and make it have value within the organization. And I think we've just seen so many of these organizations that, I mean, it's scary to me, where one organization brought in a new CISO and the person had no security background. And was fortunate enough to reach out and say, hey, I need help here because I don't know anything about security. And you're talking about, organizations that service millions of customers, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of employees. And this person is coming into this organization so far behind, the 8 ball, and you've got hackers out there that can run circles around this person. So I think those are the issues, and I don't know what organizations are thinking or boards are thinking when they allow that type of situation. But it is very prevalent, and as I said, out of the top 200 companies, Fortune 200, over 60% of them are in the same boat.
Okay, so questions? Who gave Patrick the microphone?
This question is for McAfee. It's Jim, right? Patrick, how you doing, Jim? The Stuxnet and the Flame viruses are alleged to be written by nation states, perhaps one or two that you know about. And they're quite exotic and complicated, probably cost multi-millions of dollars to write. How long before the hacker community reverse engineers some of the information in there, the algorithms, and plants them in a more widely dispersed package that then can attack other infrastructure components?
So, to answer the second part of that first, we've already seen some of that, especially with regards to Stuxnet. The full source to that isn't completely out, but there's a whole lot of it that is in the form of what appears to be someone just having run a bunch of the modules through like IDAPRO and disassembling it and then piecing together what is pretty darn close to source for some of the modules. A lot of that has been done, and Stuxnet might not be the best example because it is so specific to those particular Siemens centrifuges that elsewhere probably won't do a whole lot. But something like Flame, Skywiper, whatever you call it, has some modular stuff in there that could translate to other environments quite well. And actually, as an attack, it attacked multiple environments to begin with. So, I would say if it's not already happening, it won't be long. We've seen some sort of, what I call like POCs, lab animal kind of samples of some implementations of some of the Stuxnet modules and Dooku as well. I would venture to guess that if it's not already happening, then it's just a matter of when. Now, the interesting thing about all those is, they're really sophisticated and exotic and interesting now in 2012, but those things existed for years and were written even years before that. So they were way ahead of our time years ago. So, probably what's happening now is even more complex and more interesting, and we'll learn about that 2 years from now. So there's I think a lot more than meets the eye with regards to some of those targeted attacks that we've seen. Stuxnet, Dooku, Flame, Gauss, whatever the other ones are. So I guess to summarize it, if it hasn't already happened, it is going to happen very soon. But again, we're talking about actual attacks that started 5, 6, 7 years ago. So probably is already done.
Thank you. So we have something to look forward to. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah, a lot to learn.
So this is a question to the whole panel. What approach should we, as ISOs and CIOs, use to kind of bridge that business planning gap that each of you seem to talk about between IT security and the business side to really link that together? Don't answer all at once.
Yeah. So, I think one of the problems, and I said this in my presentation, was that where a CISO had come and said, we need help trying to get to the table, for senior management. I think that the golden rule is he who has the money rules, and so you have to find out where the money comes from and who controls that and get the influence. So, from a consulting standpoint, we always look for who's the influencer, who can make the decisions, who's got the money who can influence that decision, and go talk to them and kind of bring the two together, bring the two parties together. It has to do with awareness, and oftentimes we'll do, say, workshops just to bring people together and say, here's how you realize the value of security and why it's important for an organization. But there's also situations where, some of the new RFPs for implementing Obamacare has 29 federal and state security regulations that have to be complied with. So you look at it and say, okay, clearly there's money that has to be allocated to make that compliant, because you can't implement that without compliance, and it has to be evidenced. So there's one of the drivers right there is compliance.
And if I may, one other point that we look at is what we refer to as evidence-based risk management. Because part of the challenge that you're referring to is not convincing the CIO or the COO, it's the CFO. So that's really what you're trying to influence, is how can I identify security not as a price point, but as an enabler, as a method of building resiliency. And by using evidence-based risk management as a tool, you can build those business cases and show that loss issue that you're focusing on, and how to identify that by using actual breach data, not only from your own organization, but from other like organizations to show trends and capabilities. Because if you look at risk as that equation of threats, vulnerabilities, and consequences, it's the consequence piece that you can impact from that standpoint. And that's really from the federal side and from the private sector side, how we build those business cases and do that due diligence to ensure that we're identifying value. Because if I can only spend 60 cents on security, where do I need to put that? And this is where I'll have the most impact. It may not be, I'm going to speak heresy here, chasing threats. It may be focusing on patching vulnerabilities. But that's really what you have to determine.
And I would say from just a planning perspective of making sure that, your security folks and you as ISOs or CIOs have the communication, have the open communication. I'm talking about workshops. Educating. We talked about it at lunch. It's like the education process, whether it's educating our users, our own folks, our internal people, but leveraging that education to help our CFO folks and our CISOs and ISOs and so forth to understand the value and what is it going to deflect against our business, right? I mean, what are we going to be able to accomplish with this? And I think that goes a long way. I've found it to be very helpful in getting other people involved.
And I'd like to just add that, that we, like Leslie said, we talked about this at lunchtime about the training and awareness. That's the key. I think that's one of the first key points is getting the business folks, CFOs, involved and at least having them understand what the threats and the vulnerabilities out there, so it's not all doom and gloom. But then it's incumbent upon us as security professionals to not do and I've said this since day one, not do the skies falling, but involve them and show them and have them understand why it's important and why security is important, and building those relationships and trust, because without that, we're still that person that walks in the door that they go, oh no, now what? So I think all of that is key to making sure that we build those trusts and those relationships.
One is to be compliant on security. A lot of resources are utilized, and starting from the PC slowing down, servers have to work hard. So we see a lot of burden on the infrastructure to be to make sure it is secure. As well as I see that IT departments struggle to keep up with the patches, ongoing patches, several, especially Microsoft, and all of the patches they need to install, they got to test, they have to make sure. So I see a constant kind of struggle, department struggle to make sure the security side is taken care of. So what can we do? I mean, with the limited resources, how can we, achieve, how can we convince?
I can just throw out the first thing that came to my mind is, the typical response is outsource. If you don't have the money, let somebody else do it. I think, and I'm not being facetious, but one president of a company in Switzerland had said to me, in the cosmetics field, said, John, I like to sell lipstick, but because of all the things that we're doing technology-wise, I've become a technology expert. I don't want to be an IT person. I want to go sell lipstick. Just take this off my plate, do something, right? So the reality is, these are some of the things that you have to have some analysis of the situation and the problem and look at alternatives. And I think that if the visibility isn't there to highlight the problem and analyze the costs and the options, that's something that needs to be elevated or escalated to those who can make those decisions or who can supply some of the funds. What you'll find, and this goes to IT transformation as well as security transformation, is the approach is still the same. And what you find is when you start analyzing these areas, that you can find savings out of this. You can reduce the staffing resources required. Infrastructure can be optimized, reduce the number of servers. What you find with all the virtualizations, you still get sprawl. And so people just throw more and more servers out there, and who cares, right? But pretty soon you find out you have the same problem you had before you did that. And it's like, we need to have a method to analyze this and get metrics, right? There's a new technology to get metrics off your PDA, the ROMBI method, and so that IT executives want to be able to be at a movie theater, just punch this into their phone and look and see how am I doing, real time. It is really an issue, and it has vital importance because you're talking about everybody wants things real time. And so if you're going to spend time patching systems, and now I got a 2-hour window for backup, and I got 2 hours for patching, things like that, and if it doesn't go, I got to back it out and everything. So now I got to collapse the window. Forget about it. You don't have that luxury. So I would say that the first thing I would do is identify what the issue is and start mapping out what would it cost to come in and analyze this and look at the different options. And then take that constructively back to the top and say, look, I think we can get some savings out of this, or optimization.
And also, if I may add, another driver for infrastructure as a service is just that you have a homogeneous environment that's maintained. So patching is not incumbent upon you. You may be using thin client at your location as a desktop. So that enables remote patching. It also enables a security profile to be maintained and managed that you would not normally be able to maintain on your own, because you have that security operations center 24/7 net flow analysis, ongoing security scans, and all of the perimeter IDS, IPS, UTM capability that you no longer have to maintain as a cost point. So that is another benefit into moving into that distributed computational model.
Another question over here?
Yes. This is more of a privacy related question. I've seen the Obama cybersecurity bill act that's out there. And what I was wondering is there going to be any state level guidance in providing offshore type of data sharing? And from the federal level, is there going to be some state guidance to help states implement that Bill of Rights to customize for different state agencies and states as well, because it is a national, federal bill of rights.
Right, and was talking to Congressman Lundgren about that, and they are struggling with that at the federal level, and there are many reasons why. Yes, there's definitely a need for that, and we are trying to wrestle with it right now. There are just a lot of different factors, and you know, don't touch my stuff, and you know, but there's also regulatory requirements that are there, depending on, you know, and so the mix of that is where we're struggling. But yes, we are looking at, and one of the things we're looking at on the subcommittee, we're looking at privacy-related things. But as of right now, I can't tell you when or where it is, but we are looking at that, and it is one of the big issues that we know we need to look at and put policy out there for the privacy side.
The question I had is related to that one, but a little different. Is compliance in the cloud. You know, there's a big push and a lot of financial reasons for the business analysts in our various agencies to go that route. Where I get confused is how we transfer that risk, but yet still maintain our regulatory compliance with state law.
Well, there's a couple of ways of doing it. Go ahead. Okay, there's a couple of ways of approaching that, or looking at it. So you can manage a private environment if you so choose to. If you decide that the risk associated with migrating to a hybrid or a public environment exceeds your comfort level, you can ensure that the cloud is FISMA compliant, PCI compliant, HIPAA compliant, and all the other PCI compliant to make sure that the environment you're operating in maintains the data integrity that you're looking for.
That really wasn't what I meant.
Okay.
I can understand that, and it would be very easy for a vendor to supply me with a report of HIPAA compliance or PCI compliance. But whether or not the vendor's hosting my data in this country or not, do I have that much control over that?
Well, and again, depending on the agreement that you have established, for instance, with our government partners, they're hosted in only 2 locations, Culpeper, Virginia, and Miami, Florida. So that's where the data is physically hosted. So yes, you do have that capability.
And that comes into making sure you write a good,
Knowing what you want.
service levels, and, you know, specifically talking about data will not just be residing, but not pass through, because you need to talk about that as well. Data's not going to go outside of in some cases, there are some that want it not outside California. But, you know, not outside the United States, nor can it pass through a POP or a presence that's outside the United States. So that is incumbent upon you, the way you write your contracts. And that was one of the things that in fact, there's going to be, OTEC is, and I'll make a plug for that too. Ron Hughes is going to be putting together, they're going to have a cloud event. And the guy that I talked about in the webinar about cloud, that wrote the article on making sure your contracts for cloud are written right, what to look for, what, you know, those pitfalls, is going to be a guest speaker there to talk about that. We just got him to talk about that. So it's very important the way you write your contract.
Yeah, I'll add to that too, and it depends what kind of data is being put out there in the cloud. And it's got, you know, HIPAA data, that you have a whole other set of requirements. And just be clear that you still own the risk. You know, it's just a subcontract condition, if you will. So you're still on the hook for it. And in some states, at least 2 states, if there's a data breach and it's been shown that you were negligent, someone's going to jail. Okay, that's the new laws. So it's incumbent upon the person, you know, in this role to make sure that they are, you know, have everything covered, because they could find themselves in a place they don't want to be, literally.
I have a question for you, Keith. With the attendees here in the room that are sanctioned with the being championed to take care of the security for their respective agencies, are they also being provided budgets to implement the security issues that are required for them to meet
Why did you ask me that question? I think it's a good question for Paul. So it's,
Actually, I wanted her to ask you.
You asked me to, yeah.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
That's a very good question, and it is one of the biggest struggles that, ISOs, fight with. And it's one of the things that I've been talking about since I came on board, and that is trying, when you talked about metrics, I mean, one of the things we've got to do is be able to get to a point where we can measure and show risk so that, and not just something we, made up, but showing and having metrics to show vulnerabilities, and not by agency necessarily, but as a whole, as the state of California, here are our trends and here are the things we're facing. And with that information, then go back and be able to look at, okay, to mitigate this, we need X amount of budget to implement these kinds of things. And with that also comes, hopefully, the ability to have that be a security budget and not part of the IT budget, so that you're then being, told by it's not fair to the IT folks necessarily for you to have, for them to have to pay for the security piece, but until or unless we get a specific security budget, they're on the hook for it. So what I'd like to see is an IT budget and then a security budget, so that way you're not, the ISOs aren't always out there, kind of begging at the doorway trying to say, hey, we need money for security. So,
with most of the departments, pretty much everybody moving to the web, pushing out services to the constituents, so that they don't have to come into offices and whatever. How come the state, or at your level, why don't you provide a centralized vulnerability and penetration testing team to look at the departments, look at how they stack up in their security, and then holding them accountable at your level to address those issues? And then that also empowers the information security officers, who sometimes have, because they report to the CIOs, who may not think security is a good, that it even needs to be done.
sure, and I would love to be able to do that with my staff of 6. Seriously, I completely agree. I would love to be able to do that, and one of the things that I've talked to several of the folks in this room, the different vendors, about looking at grants, looking at other types of things to put a big, I recognize and realize that the agencies have a very difficult time with risk assessments, vulnerability assessments, and the like. But frankly, guys, honestly, I have a staff of 6, and there are, 150, 160 different entities, agencies out there. So what I'm trying to do is work with folks and some of the security partners and folks and one of the things I talked to Congressman Lundgren about is more grant money for stuff like that. If we had that type of money out there, and that there was a pool of money that I could say, here you go, guys, instead of you having to try to do this on your own, and with that grant, either putting together a centralized contract, like a CMAS kind of thing, for the state that says these different vendors you can go to get your assessments done. That's something I'm looking forward, or trying to work towards and move towards. But without a pot of money out there to do it, it's difficult. But that doesn't mean that, and you can ask several of the vendors in here, that's one of the questions I ask them all the time, help me with this. That, along with the security and awareness training and or training for ISOs, not necessarily to get your security certifications, but classes that are like that. Somebody mentioned something about, I think it was John mentioned about this company that brought folks into security that had no security background. Well, guys and gals, look at what we've got in the state. We've got folks that were probably administrative people that at some point they said, oh, okay, you're doing computer stuff, you're now an IT person. So we've got folks out there, and no fault of their own, don't have any security background, but yet they're put into the ISO role, and they go, oh, now what do we do? So it's not just risk assessments. There's the training and awareness as a whole that I want to do, but also training for ISOs so that you have, again, where we could have either grants or pot money where you go, okay, we got so many seats, so different agencies, send your folks to these courses. Those are all things that I'm looking to do, and I know that sounds great like a campaign speech, but there are a lot of challenges, and as we all know, about budgeting. So I'm looking at grants, I'm looking at talking to the different folks about grants, and Congressman Lundgren, that was probably the biggest thing I talked to him about, is how can we leverage and how can we get more federal grant money for those types of programs? Because without having an assessment, and without knowing what your vulnerabilities are, where do you start? So, yeah, very good question, and I wish I had a better answer for you.
Yes, this has been an interesting conversation. We've been talking about the cloud and the different defense layers. And some of us will certainly be moving into the data consolidation over at OTEC, and to some of us that might be a private cloud. And I do believe that the service level agreement is one of those important aspects of moving into a consolidation cloud environment. Will the Office of Information Security be supporting those of us moving into this cloud environment to have different levels, service levels agreements that are more based on our data classifications and such as PCI compliance, so that we can have one size does not fit all security.
Right, and that's actually more of a Teresa question, but because Teresa's actually the California Technology Agency Information Security Officer, and there is a little bit of confusion there. But we are working with Ron and with Teresa. We're getting ready to have a conversation, and one of the things that we're talking about are the service level agreements. Ron is very, very in tune with that, and has come out and talked to me specifically about making sure he wants to make it better, and wants to make people feel comfortable with the fact that they're moving their stuff over to OTEC. So yes, we are in concert with Ron and with Teresa, who is the ISO for the technology agency. We're all talking about that. But Ron, and I'll tell you something, folks, Ron's got a tough job, but Ron is very progressive, and he recognizes that there has not been that trust factor. And I will tell you, every time I talk to him, that's the thing he's pushing for. He's pushing to do things that is going to raise the trust level for the customers that are going to bring their stuff to OTEC. And so that is something we are working with, and it's not done yet, but I know that that is high, very high on Ron's list.
Got another question over here?
Good afternoon. This question is for Keith. Has there been any consideration or any talks about collaboration with county agencies? I know with some of the state agencies who are, because the emphasis around the state has been with county realignments of services, has there been any communication or any thought that addresses the possible collaboration of security roles and responsibilities between the counties and the state agencies who interact with the counties?
Yes. Matter of fact, very closely affected. I was back at the U.S. G1st conference in Atlanta and left early to come back. Gary Coverdale, SISDA, working very closely with him now, and we are looking to and talking to, and by the way, again, not just to make a plug for Ron, but Ron Hughes within the OTEC is also looking at that. We are looking, as far as we're concerned, there is no such thing as enough collaboration. So, and cities and counties as a whole have come to me, I've heard different folks talk about, hey, what about us? And we could use some of that data. We actually have some of the counties, and we are working closely, it depends on them, but we're putting out through our ISO community that if they get on these lists, collaboration of data, putting out the same type of data we send to the state agencies on, be careful of this, be careful of that, here are vulnerabilities that we get from US CERT and that kind of thing. But then also having them attend and be part of our ISO community, and we are starting to get more and more of them attend some of these functions. So the answer is yes, that is what we want to get there. It's going to take a little bit of time, but one of the things we definitely need to embrace is getting the cities and counties more involved in what we're doing.
While the microphone is going up there, I want to put a plug in for the Security Awareness Fair. Keep in mind, the Security Awareness Fair is this October 2nd, and where we were talking about security training and awareness. Great opportunity. I want to see you all there. October 2nd, Security Awareness Fair. Over to Mark.
Okay, there's been considerable talk from the panel, and I know within the state, there's a lot of discussions about either developing our own private cloud or moving to the public cloud, or maybe doing a little bit of both. I've helped integrate and engineer a lot of solutions in the state over the last 12 years, and the problem I've seen has been the degradation of the project based on lowest common denominator. Can you speak at any length to the challenges that you're seeing in the public cloud as they bring services on? As you heard from Paulette earlier, she's concerned about not having a service that reaches the level that she requires. How do you prevent the degradation that happens as you try to get something that fits as many people as possible for the economies of scale that you need?
Anybody that wants to jump in on that? I'll let these guys answer first, and I'll throw away it.
Well, let me jump in initially, and then by all means, Carl at the end. But I would say that knowing what you want and designing your requirements up front, negotiating that service level agreement and being very specific is the first step. And again, that's why references like 293 are good starting points, because it helps you identify what your requirements are. Because that's really what you're going to focus on. Not the technologies, not the capabilities, but what the requirements are. That's how you, as I heard the question earlier, one size does not fit all. That's absolutely right. You are unique in your requirements if you are unique in your requirements. But if you say, I need cloud, okay, all right, fine. What is the operational definition? And then what service level is required? You need 24-hour notice, you need 48-hour notice, do you need instant response, do you need e-discovery, do you need forensics? What are your requirements? And all those things are spelled out. So it's really incumbent upon you to identify what you're trying to capture, and then working with the provider, regardless of whether it's hybrid, public, private, the concept or the elements are immaterial based on what your requirements are.
We've gone to great lengths to do that, and I found that when we put in everything we really want, we can't get anybody to do it.
I would say try again.
Well, and then the other thing is, there are some agencies that have, federal requirements. So I would offer to you, one size doesn't fit all, but you might have another state agency that has similar requirements to you. And rather than putting the entire bill for a private cloud yourself, getting with agencies that have, CPI, maybe you have HIPAA or some of the other federal requirements like FTB does for, that the feds put on them for requirements, and getting with agencies like that, maybe writing one together so that at least you're sharing some of the costs. You're not bearing the brunt of, an entire private cloud yourself. And that's kind of what I've been talking about with several agencies is, get together with other like agencies or folks that have, if there are agencies out there, in other states that are similar to yours, in other words, the same type of agency in a different state that have a success, why create everything from scratch? If you know one that's working, talk to them and then see if whoever their provider is, since we're getting back down to one or two providers anymore, and find out if they can give you the like, So I'd offer you to, talk to different agencies or talk to similar agencies in different states that are doing that kind of thing, and if they're successful, build on their success.
Yeah, and at the federal level, again, going on building on that, if there's a 90% solution, then look at the resource pooling element, because that is one of the 5 elements defined by NIST as a definition of cloud. So look to see if there is a resource pooling capability that exists somewhere in your organization.
And also, can you, if no one's bidding on it, because probably, if there's unlimited liability, that, no one wants to accept the risk. But if you can then break that into pieces and try to do it that way and find out, why isn't this acceptable? Why, what are what's the resistance to bidding on that? Is it because there's too much risk? It's just not possible to provide the service levels, or whatever it is, and identify those, and then try to back out some of that stuff. Say, okay, well, can we live with, as you're saying, 90% of the option? There are, by the way, more cloud co-ops and things like that that are forming for that very reason. that are specific to an industry, and they're saying, look, we have these unique requirements, let's build our own and we'll share it with like-minded industries. So they are starting to formulate. The concern that I would have if I was on the other side of the table trying to find this is like what happened in Texas. There was a company that went with a low bidder on a cloud, and turns out the feds confiscated the website or the server farm of the provider, and one of the companies that had his cloud computing done by them, all the records were there, and they couldn't send out billing, they couldn't do anything. And literally, I mean, they just closed the doors. So you have to watch out for that. The other thing is that it's no small thing to construct a contract for even cloud computing. I mean, when I was on the other side of the table and we did this, it took 18 months to go through 1,000 pages of contract provisions, and because my part of it was like 100-something pages, just the security piece, to define specifically what happens in the event of a breach, what happens if you're supposed to be covering all these things like intrusion detection. What's the timing that you have to alert me? And for the state here in California, that's a critical issue that breach notification laws, that you have to have a certain window of time. So all those things have to be considered, and you miss one, and you're on the hook for it, they're not.
Well, I want to again thank John, Jim, Leslie, and Sean, and I appreciate you guys coming out and sharing your insights with us. And again, this was a kind of a preview of what we'll be doing at IPSAP. But I do want to say that I think this has been productive, and thank you